Hey, Tim, thanks for joining us for the last day and a half, and I think speaking to some of our upcoming entrepreneurs and folks that have their own startup company. What I thought would be good if we could give some of our other students and some of the other folks around and supporting the program just a little bit of the highlights of what you talked about. And I know the emphasis here, which I think is a view that our students and others don't have the opportunity or access to that information, is really an insider's view. And you've based that insider's view on your experience and your what you've learned. So would you like to just do a quick highlight for folks for that?
Sure. So the approach to the talk that I give is really about making sure that the entrepreneur is aligned with the interests of the venture capitalists, and understand that venture capitalists each venture firm has a different business model, and that there's actually a timeline that governs how venture capitalists behave. Mm-hmm. And so understanding the timeline of what drives their behavior and aligning the interest of the startup against that probably is a predictor of at least a lower friction relationship with your existing investors or investors, prospective investors that you're trying to raise money from. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the big theme of the whole talk. Mm-hmm. A couple of things that, again, I think are really important to understand is, by and large, investors really are interested in understanding more about purchasing a stock that's going to provide a return versus understanding that they're purchasing a product. And mm-hmm. I think one of the things that one of the big mistakes entrepreneurs make when they're trying to present their company to a venture capitalist is they try to present as if they were selling a product versus presenting as if they were selling a stock. Mm. And I always tell entrepreneurs that when I was in venture capital the last year, I had four of us in a partnership. We saw 1,530 companies and we invested in 4. So the fall off rate is pretty high. Mm-hmm. And what venture capitalists are looking for in terms of filling out their portfolio and diversifying their portfolio is very different than what entrepreneurs mm-hmm. sometimes think they're looking for.
What would you say were the attributes of those 4 that were selected that certainly they stood out in a significant way from the others?
I think there's a couple things that stick out. One is the market opportunity, and the other is the team, right? Okay. And so market opportunity and team, both of which then are underpinned by technology, but technology comes and goes, right? Mm-hmm. And technology is important. It's a necessary component, but it is not the component by which we make decisions for investment.
One of the discussions that just really kind of resonated with me, you talked about a company where it certainly had great technology and capabilities, but really bad culture. And I think as entrepreneurs, I think that would probably be an area where you would miss and could cost you lots of money. Could you expand on that just to?
Yeah, the culture of the company, especially in a startup, is the most important thing out of everything that you could think of in terms of a predictor of success or failure in a company. And there are multiple ways to characterize the culture of a company. There may be a culture that's very top down, right, where the entrepreneur, the founder are basically micromanaging and dictating everything. Mm-hmm. Chances are pretty good that's not a great culture for a startup, because you want people to be creative, you want people to find different paths forward, because there's always going to be a challenge. And so if you depend on a single decision maker to decide basically the path forward for these things, it's usually a predictor of failure. Lots of times in startups, sometimes we'll see there's multiple factions that emerge, and that's typically because maybe it's hardware versus software, or it's G&A versus the company, and doing simple things like mixing things up, making sure that people don't have walls, that they have free and open workspaces, and that you mix up where they're at. Lots of times you'll see cultures where people are 9 to 5, right? Mm-hmm. They come at 9 o'clock, they leave at 5 o'clock, they stop working, and other maybe members of the company are putting in the long hours. They're doing what's required of them to be successful, and that also causes a cultural problem where somebody thinks, hey, he's not pulling his weight or she's not pulling her weight. So it requires a lot of management, care and feeding, right? But you have to sit down as a company and decide what are the things that are important, right? What's important about what you're trying to do? What I always try to encourage entrepreneurs to think about is you have the opportunity to create a company which is your company and the place where you want to go to work. What does that look like, right? And define it and then manage it.
What is the ideal? What does the ideal entrepreneur look like? I think, and let me just tell you where I really want to go with this. I think that lots of folks have this misconception of that they can be an entrepreneur,
Right.
and I think it's one of the more difficult and more challenging things to do, but yet one of the more rewarding kinds of things to do. How would you?
Well, part of what I talk about is I think one of the things that investors do is sometimes get people confused about whether they're an entrepreneur and an employee.
Okay.
And both are valuable and both are necessary, but one may not be capable of being the other. And I don't know, what does a typical entrepreneur look like? I think the characteristics of an entrepreneur tend to be things like they don't take no for an answer, right? If somebody tells them no, that actually motivates them to go farther. If somebody tells them they can't do something, that motivates them to move faster or go further. They probably have a vision and a passion for what it is they're doing, right? They're quitting their day job, they're putting their kids' college funds at risk because they have a passion for for the problem that they're trying to solve. And it doesn't mean they're completely dogmatically focused on that one thing, but they're smart enough to understand that there's a big opportunity if they can identify that first entry problem and then drive towards that first opening in the market opportunity and then just run faster than everybody else. I kind of use this analogy of dinosaur eggs and furry mammals, right? You want to be a furry mammal in that equation because they eat dinosaur eggs. So, and I don't know, from my personal experience, when I put together the first idea that became my first startup, I actually pitched the idea to two of the most respected people I know in Silicon Valley, and they both said it was the stupidest idea they'd ever heard. We eventually started the company and sold it in 2005 and returned a nice sum of capital to our investors. But I think if those two people would have told me it was a great idea and go off and start that as a division inside the big company, I would probably be in a very different place than I am today. And when they said it's the stupidest idea they'd ever heard, I knew it was a good idea, mostly because of the work that I had done here with Alex Hills at CMU. But I knew it was a good idea. And when they told me it was a stupid idea, I knew I had the opportunity then to do it outside of the company versus inside the company. Okay. So,
and I guess most people won't necessarily see that, or in terms
but
of,
entrepreneurs do, right?
so the real entrepreneurs that we're defining.
Employees would go back to their office and just go to work,
Yeah.
right? Entrepreneurs would say, wait a minute, no, this is an opportunity. I'm just going to go do this, right?
Okay. All right. So and then here at Carnegie Mellon, we have lots of students that are interested in starting their own businesses and I think taking the entrepreneurial route. What 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you have for them? The things that you think that they should just really think about and understand.
I think one of the things, just having spent the last day here talking to entrepreneurs, I think it's really important that you understand the rules of the game that you're playing. And if you don't understand the rules of the game that you're playing, you're probably not going to come out ahead. And from what I could pick up from the narrative in the conversation for the last day and a half is I don't think the entrepreneurs that I've met so far really understand the rules of the game. And that's really part of what I'm trying to accomplish through this workshop, right? Is maybe exposing people a little bit deeper to what the rules of the game really look like. And so I think that's probably number one. Number two is never take no for an answer, right? You have to keep going, and you have to find a path forward. And whether that's the straight path, which is go get financing from investors and move forward, or bootstrap the company, or find other sources of revenue or other things to do, maybe work at night while you're an employee someplace else. There's always a path forward, right? And if you're passionate about it and you just know in your heart that it is the right thing to do, you're going to get it done. You just have to find that path.
Okay, so last question. So you have certainly a busy schedule and lots of things to do, but you really have, I think, exhibited this passion to do this knowledge transfer to up and coming folks. Why?
I call myself a recovering venture capitalist. I think ultimately it's because, number one, I just see this deficit of knowledge in entrepreneurs, and it may be one of the components that holds them back. I'm not qualified to go tell them what to do, but I am qualified to show them what the other side of the table may look like in terms of the kind of things and decisions that investors are making and why they're making those decisions. Part of it's just paying it forward, right? I've been pretty successful in my career, and just having the opportunity to kind of pay that forward and help entrepreneurs honestly just feels good, right? Okay. And so it's a good thing to do.
So good. Thank you for your last day and a half. Thank you for, I think, the knowledge transfer to some of the students that we've had and entrepreneurs that we've had with you the last day and a half, and certainly for the ones who'll be able to hear it. I'm sure we'll hear more from you.
Thanks for the hospitality and the invitation.
Sure.
Thanks, Jimmy.
All right.